In the North Atlantic, halfway between familiar map labels, sits a place that is easy to overlook and hard to categorize. The Faroe Islands are not quite an independent country, not simply a Danish province, and not part of the European Union. They are a windswept archipelago of steep cliffs, fjords, grass-roofed villages, seabirds, tunnels, fishing harbors, and one of Europe's most distinctive political identities. Officially, the Faroes are an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. In practice, they operate with a surprising amount of self-government, their own language, their own parliament, their own trade policy, and their own powerful sense of nationhood. To understand the Faroe Islands is to understand how geography, language, fishing, and history can create a society that is small in population but unusually confident in its place in the world. Geographically, the Faroes occupy a strategic and dramatic position. They lie between Iceland, Norway, and the Northern Isles of Scotland, in a part of the ocean long shaped by Norse sailing routes and Atlantic weather systems. The archipelago covers about 1,393 square kilometers, or 538 square miles, with a population of roughly 54,870 as of November 2025. That makes the islands smaller than many major cities, yet spread across a landscape that feels vast because of its vertical terrain. Roads cling to mountainsides, settlements gather around harbors, and the sea is never far away. The islands are not lush in the way people might imagine from green photographs. Vegetation is sparse, trees are few, and the scenery is defined by rock, grass, water, and sky. The Faroese landscape is shaped by exposure. Fjords cut deep into the islands, cliffs rise sharply from the ocean, and weather can transform the mood of a place within minutes. This is part of what makes the Faroes visually famous, but it also shaped the society that grew there. Farming was difficult, timber was limited, and communities had to adapt to isolation and scarcity. The sea became not just a backdrop, but the essential resource. Boats, fish, birds, sheep, and safe harbors mattered more than large fields or forests. Even today, the island's physical environment explains much about their economy and culture. When land is rugged and the surrounding ocean is rich, the relationship between people and sea becomes central to survival, politics, and identity. The climate adds another layer to the Faroese experience. The islands sit close enough to the Arctic Circle to have extraordinary seasonal light, summer nights with long civil twilight, and winter days that are extremely short. Yet the climate is not brutally Arctic. Thanks to the Gulf Stream, the Faroes have a subpolar oceanic climate, with relatively mild temperatures throughout the year. The trade-off is cloud, rain, wind, and limited sunshine. Tórshavn, the capital, is often noted for receiving only about 840 recorded hours of sunshine per year, among the lowest totals for any city in the world. This weather is not a side detail. It shapes architecture, transport, daily habits, and the feeling of life in a place where the Atlantic is always present. The human history of the Faroe Islands reaches back to the early medieval North Atlantic. Sources such as Ferryinga Saga and the writings of the Irish monk de Kjol point to early settlement before and during the Viking Age. The first permanent Norse settler is traditionally named as Grimur Kamban. Like Iceland, the Faroes were settled in a world of Norwegian expansion, ocean navigation, and mixed Norse-Gaelic contact. Settlers from Norway and Norse-Gaelic communities brought animals, tools, language, customs, and social structures. They also brought thralls, meaning enslaved or unfree people, many of Gaelic origin. This means Faroese origins were not a simple story of one people arriving in an empty landscape, but a layered Atlantic history of migration, power, and cultural blending. In the early period, the Faroe Islands were governed through a local assembly known as the Lagting. This institution is central to Faroese identity because it represents a tradition of local decision-making reaching deep into the medieval era. The islands initially functioned as a kind of independent commonwealth, but that autonomy did not last unchanged. In the early 11th century, Christianity was introduced under the influence of figures such as Sigmundur Bristison, and the Faroes came under Norwegian rule. This connected the islands more firmly to the Scandinavian political world. But even under outside authority, the idea of local assembly remained important. The Lagting became one of the symbols through which Faroese people could later tell a story of continuity, memory, and self-rule. The Faroes' political path then followed the fortunes of Norway. In 1397, Norway entered the Kalmar Union with Denmark and Sweden, and the Faroe Islands were carried along with it. When that union later broke apart, the islands came under effective Danish rule. In 1814, after the Napoleonic period, the Treaty of Kiel formally ceded Norway's North Atlantic possessions, including the Faroes, Greenland, and Iceland, to Denmark. This was a turning point. The Faroes became tied more directly to Copenhagen, and the old Lagting was eventually replaced by a Danish judiciary. For a small island society with its own language and traditions, this period raised a question that would return again and again: how much power should be held locally, and how much should be directed from Denmark? Language became one of the most important battlegrounds in that question. Faroese is a North Germanic language, closely related to Icelandic and rooted in the Old Norse world. It is partially mutually intelligible with Icelandic, but it developed its own pronunciation, vocabulary, and identity. After Lutheranism was introduced in the 16th century, however, Faroese was pushed out of public institutions. Danish became dominant in church, administration, education, and law, while Faroese largely disappeared from writing for more than 3 centuries. This did not mean the language vanished. It survived in speech, storytelling, ballads, homes, and local life. But the gap between spoken culture and official power became a defining issue in Faroese history. The modern Faroese language revival was therefore more than a cultural project, it was political. The re-establishment of the Lagting and the creation of an official Faroese orthography gave the language a written standard and a public future. During the first half of the 20th century, what is often called the Faroese language conflict gradually shifted power away from Danish and toward Faroese in schools, churches, and law. This mattered because language is not only communication. It is a way for a community to define what counts as its own knowledge, its own history, and its own authority. By restoring Faroese to public life, the islands strengthened the case that they were not merely a remote Danish possession, but a distinct people. World War II accelerated the Faroes' sense of political possibility. Denmark was occupied by Nazi Germany, while the Faroe Islands were occupied by British forces. The British presence was strategic, meant to prevent German control of the North Atlantic, but the British largely avoided running Faroese internal affairs. This created a period of practical self-government. The islands experienced what it felt like to manage more of their own decisions, while Denmark was cut off. Then, in 1944, nearby Iceland declared itself a republic, showing that a North Atlantic dependency could become independent. In 1946, the Faroes held a referendum in which a narrow majority supported independence. But the result was annulled by King Christian X, and the issue was redirected into negotiation rather than immediate statehood. The compromise came in 1948, when the Faroe Islands were granted home rule. This created the modern political arrangement. The islands remain within the Kingdom of Denmark, but they govern many of their own affairs. Denmark is still responsible for areas such as defense, policing, justice, and currency, while the Faroese authorities control a wide range of domestic policy. The Faroes also have partial control over foreign affairs, especially where their own interests are directly involved. This arrangement allows the islands to remain connected to Denmark while maintaining a strong degree of autonomy. It also leaves room for debate. Some Faroese favor full independence, others prefer the current model, and many see the relationship as something practical rather than purely symbolic. One of the most distinctive results of Faroese autonomy is their position outside the European Union. Denmark joined the European Economic Community in 1973, but the Faroe Islands did not. The reason was largely fishing. Control over fishing waters was too important to surrender to a wider European framework. Today, Because the Faroes are not in the same customs area as Denmark, they have their own trade policy and can make their own trade agreements. They have, for example, an extensive bilateral free trade agreement with Iceland known as the Høyvik Agreement. This gives the islands a degree of economic flexibility unusual for a territory of their size. It also shows how central the ocean remains. Fish are not just an export, but the basis of political autonomy. The Faroese economy is highly specialized. Fishing accounts for around 90% of exports, making the islands prosperous in some periods but vulnerable to changes in fish stocks, markets, and international rules. Tourism has grown significantly since the 2010s, helped by dramatic images of cliffs, waterfalls, turf-roofed houses, and remote villages spreading across social media. But tourism also brings challenges, protecting fragile landscapes, managing small communities, and avoiding the transformation of living places into scenery for outsiders. The Faroe Islands must constantly balance openness and control. Their story is not only about beauty or remoteness. It is about how a small society uses autonomy to manage the pressures of geography, globalization, culture, and economic dependence. So what are the Faroe Islands? They are a North Atlantic archipelago, a self-governing part of the Danish realm, a Faroese-speaking nation without full statehood, and a fishing society navigating the modern world on its own terms. They field their own teams in certain sports, participate in Nordic and European institutions through the Danish delegation, and maintain one of the world's oldest parliamentary traditions through the Lagting, even with historical interruptions. Their importance is not measured by population size. It is measured by how clearly they reveal a larger truth. Sovereignty is not always a simple yes or no condition. In the Faroe Islands, identity, autonomy, and belonging exist in layers, shaped by ocean, language, history, and the persistent desire to decide locally what the future should be. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.